Alright, you asked for it. Better lighting, table, better camera. This is the best it gets. So, this is my next project. Looks a little chaotic because the table's really small. But basically, if you ever heard of the Russian PPSh, it's a super duper World War II submachine gun. And I'll show a picture right there. And my hope is to recreate one in Nerf form. Paint it up kind of realistic and get it out there as a LARP blaster. This will be my first prop-ish blaster now. I've made a stock integration from a Slingfire onto a stryfe before. It looks like this. But that's not full auto, and it doesn't look like this. You can see the difference. Definitely not quite the same. So my hope is to put an XSW full auto pusher kit into this stryfe, graft on this Slingfire stock, and then I've got a 3D printed barrel here that will have a 1/2 inch PVC tube running through it, courtesy of Peter Thunderbolt on Facebook, and that will go on like so. So let me just try to lay this out so you can get an idea of what it's going to look like. Looks a bit like a PPSh. I'm going to have to do a cut here to take the bottom rail off because the PPSh didn't have this little bump. It also didn't have this top hump, but can't really do much about that because the flywheels are here. Internally, I will be rewiring it with 18 gauge wire and, solder MTB honeybadger motors throughout. That should give me about 9 darts a second and pretty good range on 2 cell or 2 IMR batteries, which is what I plan to let this be used on. And worker wheels. It's my first time using worker wheels, but they look pretty decent. I don't see any lines from casting, so I'm going to say that these look like they're milled, which is a super plus regardless of whatever texture it has on the wheel. And yeah, I got tubs and tubs of epoxy putty to graft this stock on, but first I need to cut the strife's handle off. And before I do that, I need to open the stryfe and take out all the internals, so I'm going to do that and get right back to you. Alright, so here's the shell, completely gutted of everything, and here's the handle. I'm going to lose the rev trigger here, but that's okay because I'll put a 2-stage trigger in, so when you tap the trigger, the flywheel will start to rev. When you pull it full back, another switch will be back here, and that will actually fire. And that stock is going on at that angle like so. Of course, it'll take out the space that the rev trigger had. But that'll give me a good little bit of a stock length. Also in the future I'll have to cut that bit off, and especially cut the bottom rail off the barrel. That's just to keep the PPSh look. And what else? Oh yeah, forgot to mention that I'd be switching over to the Artifact aluminum trigger. So that just drops in, it's fitting perfectly, it slides well. Has a little post here so I can put a spring there, so it'll be spring loaded for things like, the full auto kit. These guys have their stuff together, and I would definitely recommend you go check Artifact out. I might have to clip off this little bottom portion here, but that should work pretty well. I'll get to cutting and show you what I've got when I'm finished. Alright, here's what I got so far. That's obviously cut down and placed in the right area. It's not attached, of course, but you can see I just kind of followed that straight line back and then took about a 30-degree angle. And on the back of the stock here, this was already flat, but I cut that at approximately the same angle, and they fit together really, really well. Like the curves and everything line up very nicely. That gap in the middle there, I'll either print something or fill it in with epoxy. And really not a whole lot of epoxy can go on the outside because it's already pretty flush. So I'm going to have to do a bunch of putty work on the inside of it, and probably run some sort of screw in this gap area. So far that it looks pretty good, and it's on. I like the angle that it's at. My last, what I call my strifle, had the stock further down at a steeper angle, and it just looks, it would have looked kind of funny for this application, but I like where that stock is. I'm going to start gluing it on. And one other thing, because I cut this at such an angle, I also had to clip off the end of that with my Dremel, so otherwise it would have stuck down into this area, where of course there's going to be a lot of epoxy putty. So I'll have to get the putty up in there and make sure that I'll have enough room to put my trigger and all of its electronic goodness. But other than that, yeah, I'll be right back after I finish all the putty work. Hey guys, I just tacked this on with some super glue so we can all be interested in the wonders of it. That's not going to be the rev switch, of course. I'm going to round that off. I think I'm going to 3D print a bit of a partial sphere thing there to cover that up, epoxy putty, and sand it down. Same with the front here, with the back here. I'm going to sand this sharp edge down and just kind of epoxy putty through that hole, sand that down flush. All the lettering, all the logos have to go. That's going to be an awful lot of sanding and putty filling. And then the barrel itself is going to be the lowest portion. We're going to have to cut this strip off right there. And the same thing on the actual muzzle bit. The lower tack rail needs to be cut off. So we stick with the PPSh look and feel. And yeah, all these holes in the stock from where I had to pull it apart, but I did finally pull it apart. It was a chore. 2 out of 10, would not recommend to a friend. And just so you know where I'm putting the putty, it'll take up this whole space and kind of go back into this area. I've cut all that stuff down. So putty in this joint, we'll be good to go. Alright, cool. So here we are after the putty work. I 3D printed off these kind of half spherical things, made a left and a right, and stuck them on here to give that a rounded off shape. It still breaks down the middle so you can separate the shells, but I've just spread putty around there so it's nice and smooth. I'm going to be going at it with sandpaper pretty soon here. And on the back here I decided to cut a little more off of that and putty over that gap as well. And the last thing I'm going to be doing is, well, I don't know, I'll probably sand this down and see how it looks first, but that needs to be cut flat and the rail needs to be taken off of the barrel. Because as you can see from this picture of a PPSh, that barrel bit, that doesn't stick down that far, it just kind of goes straight right there. So, yep, that's where I'm at. Let's keep chugging. So here's what I got so far. Just painted up. Everything's integrated cleanly. The grip is glued on. I realize there's a bit of a jump between my last video, but hopefully the pictures of me painting it make sense, because it is just paint, and most people know what paint looks like. And yeah. So now I'm going to be figuring out where on earth I'm going to put all these switches and stuff, and hopefully I can figure this out. Good morning, world, and it is cold. That's the poofy jacket, so you'll have to excuse that, but this is my PPSh build. I'm pretty happy about it. It's it's just a Slingfire stock onto a stryfe, the printed barrel and a 25 round drum. Other really neato things included are a extended magazine release by Gavin Fuzzy, a artifact trigger, worker flywheels, and the XSW full auto pusher kit. So this is a full auto blaster. I also have to give a huge shout out to Peter Thunderbolt for making this lovely barrel. It's really a great design. I love it to death. And the inside there is 1/2-inch PVC nesting up against the original muzzle of the stryfe. So inside we've got 2 switches on the same trigger. So basically touching this will rev and pulling it all the way back will fire. So it's a 2-stage trigger like a Tommy 20. And so there's 2 switches in there. Each of those switches SPDT switch at 5 amps. 18 gauge wire throughout. Honeybadger 130 motors for the flywheels and the pusher, which means it's running on 2 IMR batteries. And I know that's not the greatest performing, but I made this to be a LARP/cosplay blaster, and I figure people who are into that kind of, character type of play don't necessarily have the charger and the batteries to run lipos and might not want to get into that. So this also has the option of running standard AA's fairly well because they're 6-volt motors. Jam door still functions. Some other interesting parts are sights here. These are 3D printed by myself. This rear one slides onto the rail and looks like a sight. It's not really much to it. Just simple iron sights. The front one obviously is not perfectly to scale to an actual PPSh-41, but it is in the styling of a PPSh-41. I also cut off the lower rail to try to tuck in the strife's bottom kind of profile because the PPSh doesn't have that, and 3D printed this piece to go over what's left of the flywheel and the lower rail. And that's just about it. Repainted everything with a matte gray Krylon primer. Then we went in with Krylon black hammered for the body here, and the Krylon brown, standard brown for this here. This handle is actually repainted in primer, and then I came in with dry brushing and got into all of those little nooks and crannies to really give it texture. And I figure as it gets worn off to the lighter gray, it'll look really cool as well. The drum is just a standard 25 round drum that came from a Rhino fire, so it should feed fairly well. The bottom portion of it's painted so the top part doesn't have any kind of feeding issues, and that's also touched up with some just acrylic dry brushing. The body of the blaster is touched up with some metallic silver acrylic dry brush, and everything is covered in Krylon glossy acrylic clear coat. That's just about all there is to it. Let's get to firing it. Now I'm firing at my usual place and aiming at my usual place, which is the nook of this tree right here. And this shed down here on the right is at 72 feet. So let's see how this performs. Oh. And there are dart feeding issues because it is a 25 round drum and the pusher kit fires somewhere around 7 to 8 a second. And that would obviously be improved if you're using standard stick magazines, but I want to go see how far those went flying. Alright, starting from the line where I was firing at, heading on out, and I'm just going to let you know out in advance, make fun of my fuzzy gloves all you want. I had them custom made. They are super warm and comfy and I love them to death, and you can make fun of me all you want. So that's 10 feet, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32, there's a dart, 34, 36, 38, 40, 42, 44, 46, 48, 50, 52, 54, 56, 58, 60. Now we're nearing elite ranges. There's that barn. 62, 64, 66. Almost there. 68. 70. Good grouping here at 70 feet. 72. That one's roughly at 74. Oh, we passed the edge of that shed, by the way. That was 72 feet. I'll call this one 74 as well. 76. You can call those 77, but my foot's at 78. Oh, there's one way out there. Hold on. 80, 82, 84, 86, 88, 90, 92, 94. Wow. That is not to be expected from anything with that long of a barrel, regardless of how much power it's got. But that was really far. Let's fire it off a few more times and see if we get similar ranges and also just really cool firing shots. For this next bit, I'm going to be using a 10-round magazine from a demolisher just because it's got a stiff spring and I want to know how fast it'll fire. The original PPSh either had a really curvy magazine or a 70-some-odd round drum. So magazines will work well, and I think a Worker 22 would work really good with this. But let's see how this shoots. Out of 10. And now one more time with the 25-round drum in it, firing from about 30 feet. I'm going to try and shoot bursts. Here's another few shots. I'm going to be trying to fire them off in burst because, again, I'm using the drum here and it doesn't like full auto too terribly well. And those ranges were kind of amazing. I just want to walk you down there. Here's your first start at about 55 feet. Large grouping here, closer to 60 feet or so. Remember, the left edge of that barn is 72 feet. Barn, shed, whatever. There's 72 feet. I mean, look at this. There's a decent grouping out here, close to 90 to 100 feet. So it's definitely got some oomph. Wow. That's close to 105, 110 feet out here. And so my final thoughts are, wow. Range-wise, this is getting a lot more than I ever expected it would be. I know I put a decent amount of power into it, but the long barrel and the barrel, honestly, the inner diameter of this one is much different than the original Nerf barrel, and I never thought it would get that far. The 25-round drum, it acts like a 25-round drum. I never expected it to shoot very well full auto. It's more for decorative purposes because everybody sees a PPSh and they think drum. Worker 22 mags will look great again with this. Overall, I'm really pleased with the paintwork and how well it came out. There's even some crackling here on the stock where the clear coat got a little excessive, and I think that actually looks good. Hopefully you'll like this. There's an eBay description in the link because it is for sale. Please like me on Facebook, subscribe if you enjoyed this, and don't get shot.